He brushed her tail, and at the end of it, I said to him, "What are you taking from this experience?" And he said, "I just need to slow down and take little steps. I've been trying to do too much and all at once." The activity was grooming. The activity could have been a lot of other things, but because we slowed down enough, he was able to see that it wasn't the doing that was the important thing. I hope that gives a little bit of a flavor of why it's not about the activity and why it's so important to flex from the agenda that you've set, because it might not match what your client is bringing in at that time.
Yeah. Thinking outside the toolbox.
Welcome to the Herd is Calling podcast. This is where we break free from conventional norms to explore the art, science, and wonder of the horse-human connection. I'm Josh Williams, and together with my wife Victoria, we're your hosts. Our mission is to inspire and empower you to improve the lives of horses. Subscribe to the Herd is Calling on Substack for behind-the-scenes stories and unique content. Now, let's get to the episode. Welcome to the Herd is Calling podcast. We are exceptionally honored to have Dr. Veronica Lac here today. She is an LPC and the founder and executive director of the Herd Institute. She teaches humans how to incorporate horses into their work as mental health practitioners, educators, and coaches, and has been in the field of equine-assisted services for over a decade. Building a sense of community and belonging is at the core of Veronica's philosophy of working with people, and she's committed to raising awareness of the need for diversity, equity, and inclusion in the equine world. Veronica serves on the board of a number of industry-leading organizations, and she is the author of 3 best-selling books in the field of equine facilitated work. Welcome, Dr. Lac.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure and an honor.
Yeah, thank you. So just to dive right in, do you mind telling us about your horse life these days?
Yeah, sure. My herd are the ones behind me in the background that you can see. I have 3 of them. If I move slightly, I think, oh, no, the other way around. You might be able to see the other one. So all 3 of them are quarter horses. They're all getting older, and they all have their own, each of them have their own kind of quirks in terms of, physical ailments and all that kind of stuff. So my daily routine starts with my quiet mornings of going out before the sun rises and feeding the horses and spending some time with them and just setting me up for the day. One of my favorite things is coming out of the house and hearing them whinny at me and saying, "Where's my breakfast?" And going up to them and greeting them each morning. So depending on whether I'm teaching or whether I have clients or whether it's an office day, I'm very, very blessed to be able to have contact with my herd, either looking out the window or being able to just take a few minutes and stepping outside. But my day is bookended by taking care of them. So that's what I'll be doing as soon as we're done. Is I'll be going out to feed them and poop pick and do all the things that we do as caretakers of these incredible beings.
Sounds like a good way to start and end a day. Why were you first drawn to horses? Was there a moment that you can recall that you would share with us?
I've always had this pull towards horses ever since I can remember, and it's just something about the smell of them. It's like when I think back to kind of my introduction to horses, it's the smell that stays with me and how soothing I find that scent. And I was one of those kids who I grew up for the first 9 years of my life. I lived in Hong Kong and in an apartment building on the 11th floor. The closest I got to horses was petting zoos, but there was always something that drew me to them. And one of my very first memories is going on a trail ride where it was a whole, the whole family. And I remember my brother was behind me and my grandma was in front of me, and my uncle was kind of bringing up the rear. And I'd figured out, I think I was like 6 or 7, and I'd figured out that thing you do on trail rides, when the ponies are nose to tail, and if you slow them down and you leave a gap, then all they'll want to do is trot and, catch up. And so I kept doing this, and my brother was behind me the entire time. Every time I let my pony stop trotting, all I could hear in the background was him saying, "No, make it stop, slow down." And all I wanted to do was just keep going faster. So there's something about that energy that kind of like just enlivens you,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can picture it. Well, once you were on your journey with horses, how did that unfold?
Yeah, so my best friend from middle school, high school in the UK grew up with horses. And so when we met, we just had this instant connection. And she was very generous in her kind of bringing me into her world of riding, like being on horseback before she could walk. The stories that she would tell me, like it was just like my childhood fantasy, of being surrounded by horses and lying on their backs and falling asleep on, like, all the things that you kind of want to do with your best friend pony. She was lucky enough to have had those experiences and shared them with me. As we got to kind of early teens, we started volunteering at a therapeutic riding center. And so we did that for a number of years. And then when I graduated high school, I had a big gap during college where I didn't have any contact with horses other than trail rides on vacation. And when I graduated from my master's program in the UK, I did a program in Gestalt psychotherapy, which is very somatic based. So the modality of therapy that I'm trained in is very much about noticing what happens in your body, how that translates in terms of your emotions, really working through kind of our nervous system regulation and how that translates into the way that we enter into relationships. And so as a treat for myself, I booked a block of horseback riding lessons when I graduated. And in the first 30 minutes of that lesson, everything that I've been working on for the last 5 years in my personal therapy, through my psychotherapy training, showed up in my body with this horse, this really stocky, sturdy Welsh cob called Maggie. Introduced me to this magic that could happen in terms of the healing and awareness that can come from just being with horses in a way that I'd experienced that healing and soothing as a child, but hadn't put together like the theoretical concepts of what was happening until after I'd graduated. So that led me down a rabbit hole of doing as many trainings as I possibly could, and eventually leading to me doing my doctoral program, where I focused on the research of the embodied experience of equine therapy, which then subsequently led to publishing my first book and then creating the Herd Institute.
Yeah, so it was really that first, it can all be traced back to sort of that interaction with Maggie.
Yeah, I mean, it was incredible. I remember so clearly getting on, and I hadn't been on a horse for, I don't know, like years. And I hadn't had a riding lesson, because I remember I begged and begged and begged and begged my parents, when I was about 10, 11, to, for some lessons. But those lessons involved, poor little Shetland pony that I was paired with, that was downtrodden lesson horse that kind of was probably arthritic and sore and didn't want to move. And all I kept being told was to kick, kick, kick. And, was given a crop to whack him on the back end with, and none of that felt good to me. Right. So after about, I think, 4 or 5 lessons, I was like, I'm done. I don't want to hit this horse anymore. And so then the only other interactions I had was, like I say, trail rides. But Maggie was amazing. She, you know, I got on, and I remember the trainer kind of saying to me, okay, we're just going to walk around. I'm going to put some poles out. We're going to work on just a few halts and half halts and, you know, basics, steering. Like, been a long time since I've been on horseback, came back, you know, relatively quickly. But then she asked me to squeeze my legs to go into a trot. And I just remember my entire body freezing. Like, she started and she kind of took a few steps forward and then stopped, and I lost my balance, and I was just like, oh, okay, I kind of remember this, but now I'm older and going faster doesn't feel quite so good, and I'm a little bit more scared. And everything that I've been working in my personal therapy around my hesitation of stepping into something new, or trusting myself, or kind of, you know, overanalyzing whatever was happening, all of it, bang, in that, you know, split second, I was just like, oh, something's happening that's really important. So yeah, and then I just went down lots of rabbit holes.
Yeah. Do you think it's the embodiment piece of working with horses, particularly in that case riding, but unmounted work, I think it's all accessible as well. But do you think it's the embodiment piece that made it so salient for you in that moment, or what was it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's something, and there's so many layers to it. You know, I'm kind of thinking of how I move in my body is such a cultural experience, right? That I can't separate that out when I come into contact with horses. So to give you an example, you know, and you're right, it's not just in mounted work. In terms of groundwork, I remember as part of one of the trainings that I did, equine therapy trainings that I did, we were asked to go out, to go and work with the horse, and the exercise was to ask the horse to back up. They were on halter and lead, and we were asked to back up the horse. And I remember it feeling like, it felt a bit icky to me, right? First of all, I was like, why are we doing this to this horse? You know, there were a big group of us. We were kind of paired up with the horses that we'd be working with. They were all kind of just standing there looking, you know, pretty shut down. And we were told to go and do this thing to them. Mm-hmm. And so I was coming at it kind of relatively new horse person as an adult, and, you know, being told horses have to do as they're told. If they don't, then you have to make yourself bigger and be more assertive and apply more pressure. And in this particular exercise, I remember kind of asking this horse to back up, and she kind of took a couple of steps back but didn't keep going. And the trainer said to me, you need to make yourself bigger. And I was like, I literally don't know what you mean. Like, energetically, I don't know what you mean. As an Asian woman, I have lived my life culturally being expected to keep myself small. I don't know what it means to make myself bigger. I had no sense of what that would even look and feel like. And so then I was told to pretend to be bigger, louder, you know, and it felt so inauthentic to me. Of course, this poor horse didn't know what the hell I was trying to do. And so it was stepping forward, stepping back, stepping forward, stepping back. I was confused as hell, and so was this horse. So, just in that little interaction, I started thinking about what it means to work with horses authentically within a framework of cultural competence. Whether I'm working with the horses as a mental health practitioner or, a facilitator in any capacity, or just simply approaching my horses when, I'm asking them to partner with me to do whatever, whether it's mounted or not. And so I think that embodied piece was very much, this realization of I can't make myself into a white man, right? I can't make myself, pretend to feel more powerful than I feel in that moment. And actually, I don't want to,
right?
Because what is it that I'm bringing into the interaction with, with the horses if I come in with this sense of I'm going to dominate you?
That's not going to work.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Just so much in there. And it is such a layered experience working with the horses. And I'm curious if, like, in that sense, was that the moment when you started to think about how you could do this work in a way that was different and actually more meaningful, more culturally competent? Was that like maybe the beginning of the Herd Institute, for example?
I think there were lots of seeds that were kind of planted through all of my experiences, as I started learning to be with horses. And, if I back up to this lens of cultural competency, that's been my experience of everything in my life, in terms of in any kind of learning environment. I've always been curious about kind of how one way of doing something is taken as the only way to do something, that then doesn't leave room for alternative perspectives or experiences. And I think that within the equine industry, certainly in the US, in the UK, in lots of parts of Europe where I've worked and experienced that sense of being different to everybody else, and kind of that philosophy of this is the one way. And so I really started to, or I've always questioned that, but really questioned it with the mindset of how can we decenter the human in our interactions with horses, for one, and how can we bring in more indigenous practices in how we relate to horses. And so, a few years ago when my grandma passed away and I was helping my uncle pack up her house and all the things that one collects over 95 years of their life, I was clearing out this cabinet and found a whole ton of like photo albums. And one of them, and I'd always kind of wondered where that pull towards horses had come from. And I didn't realize, I had been told when I was younger, but because I was young and stupid, I didn't listen to my granddad telling me stories, which I now really regret, because I found this yearbook of him he was in the Chinese army, in the Nationalist Army, and he was a colonel in the cavalry. And so I found all these pictures of his training group with him standing next to his warhorse, like suddenly realizing that this is in my blood.
Wow.
I'd always felt like I was coming into the equine industry as someone that didn't belong because it wasn't so visible. I wasn't represented. People like me, I didn't see many of in the equine industry that I was surrounded by, forgetting that horses play a huge, enormous role in Chinese history, that it's part of my culture, that it's part of my heritage in a way that I haven't been exposed to. And the ways that Chinese people work with horses is going to be different to how Westerners work with horses. You know, that took me down another deep dive into kind of what it means to work in a culturally competent way.
Yeah, I remember reading about that in your book, Obviously I'm Not From Here. And that was one of those moments where I was right there with you. I just loved how you wrote about that. It was so tender, and I could feel that sense of like, like maybe even just like a deep breath, exhale type of moment for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And lots of tears. Lots and lots of tears of kind of just missed opportunities to have had conversations with my granddad about it. You know, I remember we went on vacation, you know, I was begging for a trail ride, and I remember him saying to me something like, oh, you know, this will come naturally to you because it's already in you. And at the time I had no idea what he meant. But now I do. And so, yeah, I feel very grateful that I have that sense of heritage, you know, that I can carry forward.
Yeah, going back a little bit, can you tell us about the Herd Institute? Just explain to our listeners what it is and perhaps a little bit more of its origin story.
We offer training. We have two different certification tracks. One is for mental health practitioners, and the other is for educators, coaches, and equine professionals. And we teach you how to facilitate within your scope of practice of mental health or otherwise, learning and healing with horses. And the model that we teach came out of the research that I did as part of my doctoral program. And so we really, really focus on what it means to share space with horses, what it means to invite them into a process that often prioritizes the human. And we aim to offer positive interactions that for the horses, so that the healing and learning can happen in a mutually beneficial way. So we're not about, here's a thing that you do with the horses so that we can learn as humans from them and use them as a tool in the process. It's very much, what is the relationship with this horse in this moment with this human? And what can we glean from that that will be helpful to us as humans and also support the horse at the same time? Origin story of that was that I have Barbara Rector, who is pioneer of our industry, really. I did some work with her, and I did a retreat with her, and she was the one that encouraged me to give birth to this institute. I write about it a little bit in my book, Obviously It's Not From Here, about the journey that my husband and I went through with our infertility treatments. And at the retreat, I'd been saying to Barbara how I felt stuck with all of that. And she, in one of the most profound moments of my life, patted me on my knee and said, my dear, there are many ways to be fertile, and perhaps your fertility is not in the human realm. Go and give birth to your institute, write your book, and do what you were called to do. And every time I tell that story, I get goosebumps.
I just got goosebumps. Yeah, I actually got a chance to participate in a retreat with Barbara Rector years ago. I think I was maybe 23 or something like that. And it was before I even knew what equine guided learning or equine facilitated work was. And I actually was invited to go along with a friend of mine who's a psychotherapist who had been working on figuring out this work and maybe thinking about trying to offer some of it on her own. But she said, you should come and check this out. And I had no idea what I was signing up for. I was like, cool, it sounds really neat. At the time I was deep into like a professional horse training track career, you know. I remember Barbara Rector just blowing my mind. Like I thought she was magic. I literally thought she was some kind of magic witch. Like I didn't have the words or the experience and I still don't, but like even then it was just like, just processing her presence was like a lot for me. Mm-hmm. But I do remember one of the really cool things she caught me doing was doing rather than just being with the horse. It was a moment that really changed the way I looked at working with horses too, mm-hmm. and planted the seeds that are probably part of the reason we're here doing what we are. So I appreciated your story about Barbara Rector because mm-hmm. I had seen her do that kind of thing with a few other folks as well. So
mm-hmm. Yeah, she's amazing. She doesn't remember saying that to me.
Right, of course.
I remember telling her, and she was like, I don't remember saying that. I was like, it's okay, I do, and it made a huge difference in my life. So that's the main thing.
Right. So what's an example of how the Herd Institute addresses these cultural competency components that you're talking about?
Lots of ways. It's kind of embedded in our curriculum, you know, to constantly question, what is it that I believe? Why do I believe what I believe? And is it aligned with my values? Because so often we just swallow whole ideas from different spaces, different places, different people. And at the time that it's offered to us, we're like, oh yeah, that's the thing, you know, or, oh, that makes sense, I'm going to hold on to that. And then we go a little bit further down the road and we're like, oh, there's something else that I'm going to collect and make use of. So over time, we build this perspective or philosophy or like way of working that may or may not actually be consistent with our values, or they may be contradictory to each other even. So for example, when we say that one of the things that we talk about is the importance of language, that we're not in, so the herd stands for Human Equine Relational Development. That's the acronym of the Institute. And so we always come back to this human equine relationship. What does it mean and how do we develop it in a way that's mutually beneficial? And with that, it's important for us to be mindful of the language that we use, because if we have clients, participants coming into sessions with us and we're talking about using the horses, a lot of people in the industry, right, we talk about, oh, we're going to use this horse today and we're going to use this horse to do blah, blah, blah. Might sound really pedantic, but it's one of the foundational blocks of stepping into relationship. If I step into this space with the intention of using you, I'm already positioning myself in a power dynamic that presumes that I am superior in some way, or that I have the right to, that I'm entitled to ask, you know, demand, use the other in some way. And so if we really slow it down just to that, to ask, okay, if we really are looking at this and we're inviting horses into the mix in whatever it is that we're doing, and we're saying that we're partnering with our horses, is it partnering if we are making them do something? Is that aligned with what we say we're doing? Is it consistent? So for me, freedom, choice, and consent at all times as much as possible. Given that we already know, and if we take this, if we look at this from a systemic lens of horses never have in the way that we are interacting with them, never have true freedom, choice, and consent, because they are domesticated and they are corralled and they exist based on how we want to keep them and take care of them. Some spaces have more freedom, others have very little. So when we enter into that space and I'm working with a client, if I choose to put a halter and a lead rope on my horse, what is the impact of that on the relationship? How do they react and respond to a client doing that? What does that mean in the context of their relationship? And then we bring in the horsemanship piece of, am I going to stand there and hold my horse super tight under their chin and make them stand still? Or am I actually going to, even if they're on the lead rope, give them some movement and freedom and choice within the parameters that I'm setting, and recognizing that I'm setting those parameters and that I have the power, that I hold the power in that space. And so then when we deconstruct that into cultural systems, we can easily translate what we are doing to horses to marginalized populations of humans. We can easily see the power dynamics that show up when one set of beings, in our case, in the human case, in one group of the population, decides that they have the right to overpower another. Mm-hmm. So what gives us that right with the horses? What gives us that right with other people? And then we can really bring in, how does that show up in the relationships in a session if I allow space to look at that? Does that make sense? It's so multi-layered.
I love that. It is layered, but I hear just a component of curiosity that you're bringing into every interaction, and that's the space that creates more space for this inquiry. Does that sound fair? Okay.
Yeah. I quite often say that the thing that I love about being a therapist is that I get paid to be nosy. I get paid to be curious when someone says something about themselves, and I kind of go, "Oh, okay, tell me more." And even that, right? If I bring that into the mix, the power dynamics between the facilitator and the client, I have to acknowledge that in some way. I have to acknowledge that there's something about my right to ask a question, which is why scope of practice, I think, is so important. If I'm working with a corporate team and I'm doing team building, I don't have the same right to ask the types of questions that I would ask in a therapy setting. For me, I think the way that we teach and the way that we work at the Herd is very much about slowing things down to see what is actually happening. The other part of that is to hold the interactions between the horses and the clients as something that isn't up to me to decide what it means. So if a horse walks away from the client, I'm not going to say, oh, he's walking away because he's hungry and he's going to the hay net, for example. I'm going to get curious about what that means for my client, because it might mean a rejection, or it might mean an appreciation that the horse is demonstrating how he can attend to some self-care. It could mean that he sensed that I needed some space. It could mean a whole bunch of stuff that I'm not going to know. So if I put my interpretation onto the interaction, then I've already shaped the experience for my client.
this takes me to the inquiry that we've gotten from some of the folks that we work with, particularly in the equine assisted services world, where there's this pressure from the board and the donors and the parents of the kids, if it's children that they're working with, and even the clients themselves, that there's like this protocol that needs to happen. And most of it is around riding the horse. When you talk about, if you slow down something as simple as putting the halter on the horse and making that the space that the work happens, if that's where it's going to happen that day. It's not about the activity, but like making those small, otherwise considered ancillary experiences, like those are where the rich details are. And we can mine that for so much good stuff relationally within ourselves, but clearly between the horse and the human. And so I'm just curious how you all create the space in which that's the expectation.
I can give you an example with a client. I was working with a veteran, like mid-30s, and he came into the barn. The reason he was coming for therapy was because he had PTSD. He was, finding it really hard to self-regulate, and we were working on him not being what he called so triggery was the word that he used, that he would just, fly off the handle with the smallest provocation, or wouldn't even understand why he would have an angry outburst because of his PTSD. And so he'd arrived, and his habit was to do the thing so that we could get to the next thing, whatever the thing was, right? So if I said that, okay, we're going to play around with maybe building an obstacle course or something, but we need to go and let's just go out and see where the horses are at. His thing would be, okay, get the horses, bring them in, do the thing. And so one day he came in, and I said that we were going to groom the horses and maybe like hose one of them down. And he was like, "Oh, yay! I haven't done that, and it's really hot, and I think they'll love that." And so we went out into the paddock, and it was I'm going to go which way do I, this way? Cheyenne over here, the grey behind me. Went out into the paddock, and she came right up to him, and he had the grooming kit, I'd kind of laid it out already, and so he was ready with the curry comb and the brushes and everything. And so he said hello to her. The other two were the other side of the paddock, so we were at liberty, and he started grooming, and he was like doing to her. Got to get her clean. Yes. And so I said, and as he arrived, he was saying, "Oh, I've had a really busy week. I've been rushing from one thing to the next. And, I found it really hard to slow down." And so I said to him, "So how are you feeling right now, given that you've been rushing around all week? What's it like to be with her right now?" And he said, "Well, I guess I'm still rushing a little bit because I just want to get her clean so we can do the next thing." And so I said, "What would it be like to not rush? What would that look like?" And he said, "Well, I guess I could just take a few breaths and slow down." So he put the grooming stuff down, and he started stroking her, and he was at her hip. And so as he was stroking her, she turned around. She stayed there. She wasn't, there was no lead rope, nothing. She just stayed there. She turned and looked at him, and I said, "What are you noticing?" And he said, "Oh, she just turned and looked. I think she likes me being here." So I asked him, "What else do you think she'd like?" And so he just started exploring with his hands, giving her scritches here and there. And then he noticed that her tail was really tangled. And so he said, "Oh, she's really knotted up. I think I'm going to brush out her tail." So he picked up the brush and literally picked up her whole tail and tried to get the brush through the entire tail. I could see your face, Josh, right? Like, that ain't going to happen. So as I'm watching him do this, he kind of takes the brush and kind of gets it stuck. And I'm like, what's happening right now? He said, well, I think I tried to do too much in one go. And so I was like, okay, so what can you do differently? And he said, well, I suppose I could just take one little bit at a time. And so he did, and he started brushing. And we spent the rest of the session brushing her tail. She didn't move. She just stayed. She was yawning. She fell asleep. And she stayed while he brushed her tail. And at the end of it, I said to him, what are you taking from this experience? And he said, I just need to slow down and take little steps at a time. I've been trying to do too much and all at once. The activity was grooming. The activity could have been giving the horses, like hosing the horses down. It could have been a lot of other things. We could have put the halter on and led them out of the paddock and to do some of that stuff. But because we slowed down enough, he was able to see that it wasn't the doing that was the important thing. I hope that kind of gives a little bit of a flavor of why it's not about the activity and why it's so important to flex from the agenda that you've set, because it might not match what your client is bringing in at that time.
Yeah, thinking outside the toolbox.
Yeah,
very cool.
Hey friends, Josh here. We've launched a free community for The Herd is Calling. It's on Substack. Subscribe to join thoughtful discussions and access exclusive content. It's as easy to use as social media, but so much better because social media. Am I right? In the words of John Lennon, a dream you dream alone is only a dream, but a dream you dream together is reality. Like the wisdom of the herd, we are stronger together. Click the link nearby to subscribe and get in on the conversation. Now, back to the pod.
I'm sensing we're going to need to have a part 2 come back and talk more, because I still have more things I want to talk to you about. But before we get to our final few questions, can you let our audience know how to engage with your content, how to check out the Herd Institute, how to find your books, all of the ways to connect with you?
Absolutely. So you can find us at herdinstitute.com. We have a whole ton of online content. We have all the links to my books are on that website. We have past conference recordings that you can purchase on the website as well. And then all the information about our certification programs are on there as well. Thank you. I can see you've put up the little link there. I do want to do a little plug for our recent in-person conference, where we recorded most of the presentations from that. So the most recent conference recordings that you'll find on there is our Sharing Space with the Herd conference. The focus of that conference was around increasing diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how horses bring us a sense of belonging.
I actually am reading, obviously I'm not from here, Embodying a Sense of Belonging with the Help of Horses. I'm nearly finished. I wanted to let folks know we are starting a new book club. We just finished we did some Brene Brown's work in a book club. We're going to be doing Embodying a Sense of Belonging with the Help of Horses.
Oh, fabulous.
Yeah. So I'm so excited. Now folks know exactly where to go to get the book for our book club that we'll be doing through My Horse Journeys. I'm excited to talk to people about that work and maybe even have you back on and dive deeper into that particular work.
Sure. I am a certified Dare to Lead and Daring Way facilitator as well from the Brene Brown stuff. So we've actually created a program called the Daring Herd, which is a retreat that combines the Brene Brown work into working with horses. And one of my colleagues in Texas is running a series of Daring Herd workshops starting next spring. So I can get you the details for that as well if you would want to share that with your community.
Yes, please. In fact, we did Daring Greatly first, and then we did Dare to Lead for our book clubs. It's unbelievable and amazing and so fun how
Yeah.
all that work connects in with our horsemanship and our work with horses. So yeah, awesome. That's amazing. Yes, please.
Yeah, and I'll make sure the direct links are in any liner notes and on our blog site for anybody that's listening or watching this, so you can click right through.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
So our final wrap-up questions, these ones are kind of fun. Veronica, if you had to distill what's important about horses to only 3 things, what would they be?
Their smell, because it always grounds me when I have that horse scent and horse sense um, in an embodied way. Like, it doesn't matter what kind of day I'm having. If I step outside and I take a deep breath, or I step into the paddock with my horses and they come up to me, my gelding has this habit of sticking his, I was going to say snozzle, I don't know if that's a word, but it is to me, sticking his nozzle right in my nose, so that we kind of just sniff each other. And it's one of my favorite things in the whole world. So smell, I think their honesty when they are given the choice to have an opinion. My mare Reba is very clear about what is okay and what isn't, and I have learned so much from her about sticking to my beliefs, sticking with my gut, sticking with who I am. 3 things, he said. So hard to distill it into 3. Relationships.
Yeah,
Good
beautiful.
ones. Good ones.
We're on the same wavelength with the snuzzle. We actually posted a little reel because we like to not take ourselves too seriously. We were doing like a bodywork training and I was holding the muzzle and I said snozzle. So I had a little variation from snuzzle. I like to use snozzle,
Yeah.
but we're on the same.
I kind of
same
looked at
length
him
there.
like, what? Nozzle? And yeah, but it was perfect. I knew exactly what he meant. So
I think for me, like I say it to him every morning. Like, can I have a snuzzle? And it's a sniff in his muzzle.
right. I love it. It's the perfect word for that smell too and that interaction. So when it comes to horses, someone or something that you or who you feel gratitude for.
My horses. But one in particular would be Rupert, who was a little goth rock pony, my very first real pony love back in the UK. He was the one who led me. I mean, Maggie, yes, that Welsh cob that I mentioned, but Rupert, I had Rupert, at least him, and for a while, and he was green, and so was I, and we learned a lot together.
Understood. One word to describe the kind of horse person you aspire to be.
I want to say just one word. Compassionate.
Or 2 words.
Compassionate. I couldn't think of the word. I couldn't think of the one word that would encapsulate not being human centric. Like placing them at the center of things instead of like what from a human point of view.
It's beautiful. I've heard you talk about the smell a couple of times. We were just talking earlier to a friend of ours who is into animal behaviorism, and she's a lot smarter than me. So she knew like all the pathways of the brain that smell is like more of a direct channel. I heard you somewhere, and we've been looking at so much of your stuff, I can't exactly remember where it was, but you even had an activity where you like use the horse's scent. Do you mind just sharing about that briefly?
Yeah, it was during the pandemic so your olfactory system, it links it links into deep memory. It links into your long-term memory. So there's something about the smell that kind of brings up all kinds of, like, I don't know, smell is one of those things that, can take you back, way back. Like the smell of mashed potatoes with really buttery mashed potatoes for me, takes me back to lots of memories with school, and like certain smells just transport you, right? And so I think that's the power of it. But during the pandemic, partly because I'm so sensitive to smells, that I knew that clients were struggling with not being able to come out to the barn to see the horses, during the lockdown. And so I did this thing where I took some bandanas and I rubbed it over on my horses, and then I put them in Ziploc bags and I sent it out to my clients and got them to guess which bandana was which horse, like based on the smell. And then as almost kind of the evolution of that too, is that came from knowing how important transitional objects can be for clients. Like what can they take from the barn that will help them when they get back into their regular lives, that they can touch or feel or sense, that would remind them of this feeling of safety or belonging or whatever they got from being with the horses. Is that we would just get a whole ton of bandanas and just rub them on the horses, stick them in a Ziploc bag and give them to the clients to take home.
I love that.
We may be borrowing that.
Yeah, that's very good. That's so awesome.
Gosh, I have so many other questions, but this has been great. And hopefully you'll grace us with another appearance, Dr. Lac. And I just want to take a minute before we say goodbye to you, just to recognize the degree that you've challenged the status quo, how you've gone into this industry as really a radical change maker, and how needed and powerful and challenging that must be. But yet you've created this sense of community and belonging, which, I know is at the heartbeat of your mission and the mission of the Herd, by extension, the Herd Institute. It's a mission centered on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's just so beautiful. I mean, we've been in this world a long time, and we've been seeing the need for this. So when we've been watching you for years and just saying, wow, so she's doing it. Yeah. And I just want to honor your work for creating this tangible, real change at a systemic level. I mean, that's just unbelievably challenging. It's very easy it's actually not easy. It's hard to even see the problem, but then to create a systemic level change, that's a whole other level. But just your work as a facilitator, a therapist, founder of the Herd Institute, your courage and vulnerability in sharing your own story of not belonging and feeling like an outsider. I just honor and appreciate you so much. And thank you for sharing your time and a piece of your incredible journey with us here today. And I hope we get a chance to keep getting to know you a little better.
Thank you. It was really kind words. I really appreciate you saying all that. And I also want to say that change doesn't happen, with one person. That sense of belonging, the more we all feel like we belong, the more change, we can enact and inspire others to join. And I have not done this on my own. I have some incredible colleagues and friends and family and support and allies in this process, and now including the two of you, to spread that message of why this work is important and these conversations are needed. So I'm really grateful for you too.
Yeah, the herd is stronger together.
Mm-hmm. It is. It is. All right, Veronica, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed the show today. We'd love for you to join our free Substack community for The Herd is Calling. Connect with us, engage in thoughtful discussions, and access exclusive content. Click the link nearby to subscribe. It's so easy and totally free. We appreciate you listening, and as always, may the horse be with you.